Both Jesus and blacks were strange fruit. Theologically speaking, Jesus was the first lynchee who foreshadowed all the lynched black bodies on American soil. He was crucified by the same principalities and powers that lynched black people in America. Because God was present with Jesus on the cross, and thereby refused to let Satan and death have the last word about his meaning, God was also present at every lynching in the United States. God saw what whites did to innocent and helpless blacks and claimed their suffering as God's own. God transformed lynched black bodies into the re-crucified body of Christ. Every time a white mob lynched a black person, they lynched Jesus. The lynching tree is the cross in America. When American Christians realize that they can meet Jesus only in the crucified bodies in our midst, they will encounter the real scandal of the cross. James H. Cone, The Cross and the Lynching Tree.
The dusty needle gospel.
The dusty needle gospel. The needle gospel. The needle gospel. The dusty needle gospel. Needle gospel.
Welcome to the first episode of the Dusty Needle Gospel. My name is Jamin, and today we're going to be hopping into one of my favorite books of all time within the stream of theological justice. It's from a American minister and theologian known as James H. Cone. Now, he's popular for a few different books, but this one is probably my favorite from him, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. It's not an overly long book, and honestly, like within the streams of justice books, like I would highly encourage everyone to read it. Partially because it's so good at like taking theology and making it applicable and livable. It doesn't just leave the cross behind us. It puts it all throughout history and then sticks it right into our world today so that we recognize why all of this matters, why the cross matters, and how we are still capable of it when we're not paying attention. And so this is a book that we'll discuss a bit more today, and I think it's an important one as it is Black History Month right now, and we're already seeing racism right now. Yesterday, Trump made a post on one of his social networks of the Obamas who had been turned into monkeys through some kind of AI video, and it was horrifically demeaning. There's a littered past behind comparing black people to monkeys, to primates, and he stepped right into it in 2026 during Black History Month. Of course, the world, honestly, despite the political sides, there were lots of people who were voicing just how disturbing and messed up and racist this was. We see it right around us, from the top down, staring us right in the face, these kinds of racist acts. And so, this book remains timely for us today. It remains timely for other reasons too. I think its applicability is kind of across the gamut. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. But like as we look at Minneapolis and we see some of the things that have been happening there, as migrants have been having confrontations with ICE, and many citizens have been stepping up to try to stop it. And we look at the past of Minneapolis too, where George Floyd was killed. Like, we see the cross alive and well today, and we see the story lived out by Jesus alive and well too. And we can sleep right through it if we don't pay attention. I know it's a littered term, and a lot of people, like, they hear it and immediately they're in a million different headspaces about it. It's that word woke, which in its original usage was really more used by people of color back in the day. I think it started in the early 1900s, but it was more or less to say, like, stay woke, stay aware of the social injustice and the racial prejudice around you, because if you're not, you will sleep right through it. You won't even notice it, though it's staring you right in the face. You have to actually wake up to it. And I know that's an important part of my own story as a white man, I was not always paying attention to the things around me. And once I started to hear the voice of others being spoken, once I actually started to listen, once I put down my defenses rather than stayed walled up to all that, man, my heart just broke and I became awake to the situations that people go through who are not like me. And once that happened, you really can't turn that back. And so that's kind of the invitation, actually, of the Dusty Needle Gospel. We want to wake you up. Jesus was always saying, let those who have ears hear. And we believe that the gospel was presented to us through Jesus, and it was right there for us to grab onto. But we've kind of collected so much dust on that needle that it's got muffled. We hear it wrong. So we're dusting off the needle today. And hopefully with every episode, we hope to dust that needle off so we can hear the gospel just a little more clearly than we did before, so that we have ears to hear the real thing as it should be presented through a clean needle, and that we would become woke, aware of the things around us, of the pains around us, that we would not be so defensive as to say, well, that's not my experience, but to hear the many voices around us saying, well, it is ours, and then begin to allow the Spirit to transform our minds that we might become aware, and then step into the story with them. So James H. Cone is going to help us do that today, and it's going to be painful. Like I said, this is a horrific book, but it's also incredibly beautiful what he does with it. So let's get started, shall we? The cross and the lynching tree are separated by nearly 2,000 years. One is a universal symbol of Christian faith. The other is a quintessential symbol of black oppression in America. Though both are symbols of death, one represents a message of hope and salvation, while the other signifies the negation of that message by white supremacy. Despite the obvious similarities between Jesus' death on a cross and the death of thousands of black men and women strung up to die on a lamppost or tree, relatively few people, apart from black poets, novelists, and other reality-seeing artists, have explored the symbolic connections. All right, so as we dive in here, we kind of got to catch the premise of what Cone was going for with this book. And part of the reason that he wrote it in 2011 is because he looked throughout history and he found that there was no theologian who had written on this before. The idea that the cross of Jesus is identical to the lynching trees that populated America. These are the same object. They're synonymous with each other. That when you see Jesus on a cross, you are also at the same time seeing a black body hung on a lynching tree in America. You are experiencing Jesus. And the art might go on to say what you do for or to the least of these, you do unto me. Just as Jesus was an innocent person given capital punishment by the principalities and powers that hung him there as an example to an audience of what they would do to you too if you got out of line, or if you were an insurrectionist or a rebel, as Jesus was often viewed as by powers and authorities. Or if it's just a statement to say, like, we don't like you here, we don't want you here. Like, it's the cross and the lynching trees. They are a way to captivate an audience, to threaten them into place. And Cone looks at these things and says the only people that caught on to this throughout history were the artists, the poets, that they could look at at Jesus on the cross and say, what you do for the least of these, you do for me. If you're going to hang them on a cross, then you're hanging me on a cross. If you're going to hang them on a lynching tree, then you're hanging me on a lynching tree. Likewise, if you're going to do positive things like give them water and food and clothes and take care of the sick, like that you're also doing for me. But the poets and the artists, like they could prophetically look at the cross and recognize it in their own environment as lynching trees. But all the theologians, all the people that were supposed to be able to make an action happen, they were just missing it. It was around them. They were desensitized to it. It was just something that was happening. Some of them might have been like, yeah, that needs to stop, but their action often wasn't there. It was just kind of everybody sleeping through the horrific things that were happening around them. And Cone, of course, is not okay with this. So he writes a whole book trying to bring Jesus into our world that we might see it right in front of us. And one of the things that I love when he does this is it gives us the prophetic eyes to see Jesus right in front of us in so many other ways. So like one of the things that I've been arguing with people for a good long while now is that Jesus was a refugee. He was born in a feeding trough, and then sometime after needs to, by God's own declaration, needs to flee to Egypt to find safety because the political powers around him want to kill him. And so he flees to Egypt where he has to live. And when he comes back home, he still can't come back home. Joseph is nervous when he finds out that though Herod has died, his son is now reigning. And so God redirects Joseph to a place that's still not his home. And Joseph and Jesus and Mary, like they continue to grow up there. Just as we might see Jesus on the cross and black people on lynching trees, so we might see Jesus the refugee in Egypt as migrants, as the undocumented here. Now, this is where we have to put our defenses down here, because this is a pretty clear image to see between crosses and lynching trees, between Jesus the refugee and modern day refugees. But sometimes we get defensive instead of embracing the prophetic image in front of us, we start to argue against it. And usually the way in which people will do this is through biblical scholarship, which it so saddens me. Like a good theologian is trying to understand the character of God and what he's like, and they use the Bible to do that. A good biblical scholar is trying to engage with Scripture to understand more clearly what it's saying so that we can understand who God is and what he's like. So like a good biblical scholar should be a good theologian, and a good theologian should be a good biblical scholar. They are two separate fields, but they intersect constantly. And I would suggest that we're not doing good biblical studies when we are trying to look at the minute details to wipe away the prophetic image in front of us. So, for example, with refugees, people are going to fight and be like, oh, well, Jesus wasn't a refugee. He went to Egypt, and there in Egypt, it's basically like if you were in the U.S., you'd be fleeing from Michigan to Indiana kind of thing. Which I would say, how do you not see the correlation right there, right? It's like, I live in Michigan. If I am a young boy and the governor of Michigan decides that they are going to kill me and I have to flee to Indiana to take refuge there from the governor that was trying to kill me in the other state, and I can't even return home because I'm too nervous because the next governor also scares me, and so I have to kind of relocate myself to a different area than I was just to kind of escape the vision of that governor, and I'm scared to go home. Like that's the same prophetic image. And if we use the minute details of biblical studies to try to wipe that away, then we're not being faithful to the theology of God. We're not being faithful to who he is and what he's trying to show us. The fact that Jesus is an innocent man given capital punishment, that should speak volumes to us today about justice, about what powers do to people. We too need to recognize that there are innocent people around us today who are not given justice but given capital punishment as well. And if we miss that part of the story, then we're not listening to the whole life of Jesus. If we want to look at the cross and be like, well, yes, Jesus was hung on a tree, but that's just kind of poetic language. Really, he was hung on two beams of wood, not a tree. It's not the same thing. I don't know what kind of argument people would make to say that the cross and the lynching tree are not the same. But I know somebody would. They'd use biblical studies in some way to say that there's some kind of a difference here and thus miss the theology that's sitting prophetically right in front of them. They are choosing not to have ears to hear the thing that is speaking loudly in front of them. They're not cleaning off the needle so that the gospel sings in the way that it is supposed to, without dust and crackles. And that's one of the things that is so important in all talks of justice. Where is Jesus in the midst of us? Because he wanted us to catch it. When you feed the hungry, you feed me. That was Jesus. That was Jesus, that man that you passed today who was holding the sign next to the store saying homeless. You passed by Jesus. You passed by the image of God. And if we want to keep writing Jesus out of the pictures around us that are calling for our attention, then something really scary happens. We become the perpetrators. We become the ones that will hang people on crosses still to this day. We'll talk about that next. Before we do that, I want to read an opinion article. Actually, it's more like a story written by W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a very popular writer for Black culture. This was in the magazine The Crisis in December 1919. It's volume 19, issue number 2. And in it, Du Bois gives us a glimpse into what if you thought of the whole story of Jesus through the lens of Black culture. So that the things that maybe myself as a white person often miss that's going on around me that other people are dealing with suddenly start to pop. So I become awake to them, that I would see, wow, I never thought of Jesus in that light before, going through those kinds of things that are happening all around me because I don't go through those kinds of things. So let's read that next before we move on. The Gospel According to Mary Brown by W.E.B. Du Bois. She was very small and pretty and black and lived in the cabin beyond the big road and down the lane by the creek, there where field on field of green cotton was flowering in the spring. And one night, as she sat there all alone and wistful, watching the stars, a woman passed by and hailed her. She shrank back in the shadows, but the woman smiled and said full softly, "Fear not, Mary, for thou hast found favor with God." And then Mary knew. She brought out the old book and read the lines aloud, following them with her little dark finger. "My soul doth magnify the Lord, for he hath regarded the low estate of his handmaiden. For behold, from henceforth all generations shall call me blessed." And thus, at last, in years of hours, she brought forth her firstborn son. She called his name Joshua. Day after day, she sat and watched his perfect little form. Was he not a beautiful baby? His skin was black velvet. His eyes were star-sown midnights set in milk. His tiny teeth white pearls, and his hair all tender tendrils of silk. Sometimes, some very little times, a pain caught her as she cuddled him close. Would it not be better for him if he were whiter? Brown or yellow or dusky cream? Then she would say fiercely, "No, no. Is not love who is God his father? And would his father send a black baby to this world just to make him suffer?" And so each night, after work, she took him out beneath the stars, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them. And she heard the angels singing, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men." Thus did Mary, the mother, begin to dream dreams. And the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. Now his mother went down to town every Christmas to settle for her crops, but it was not until he was 12 years old that he went with her and saw town for the first. How marvelous and wonderful to him was the revelation. Mary finished her work and started home, but Joshua tarried behind. When Mary found him not, she turned back seeking him. After 3 days, she found him in a church, sitting in the midst of the deacons, both hearing them and asking them questions. Why were colored folk poor? Why were they afraid? Whose father was God? Did the deacons know God? Well, he did. God was his own father. And all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. But his mother said unto him, "Son, why did you do me this way?" And he answered, "Wist ye not that I must be about my father's business?" And Mary caught her breast in pain, for how may a father be mentioned when one's father is only God? But she kept all his sayings in her heart. So Joshua went back to the plantation and worked. He plowed and picked cotton and hoed and drove mules, and finally learned to be a carpenter. And always he increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. But not, alas, with all white men. Most of them mistrusted him. They could not place him. He was neither sullen nor impudent, but he looked at them with a certain clear understanding and calm sense of authority. He carried himself like a man, and this they resented. "Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary?" they asked. "Didn't we keep him on the plantation and out of school? And yet he's strutting and talking and preaching. He's putting ideas into black people's heads." They slipped down to the old wooden church by the creek and listened to him preach. The people were scattered on the greens under the trees, eating their lunch out of baskets. And Joshua opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor. Blessed are they that mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are those which are persecuted. All men are brothers, and God is the Father of all." Then all the multitude lifted up their voice and sang, "Good news, the chariots are coming." "What kind of talk is this?" said the white folk. "Behold, he stirreth up the people." Whereupon they took counsel together. They stopped his preaching and doubled his work. They cursed and drove his hearers. They warned and beat them. Mary watched all this in mounting terror. She saw the hurt in Joshua's eyes and bitterness in his heart. She knew that he suffered, not simply in himself, but with every other sufferer. That he was wounded by every sin and bruised by every injustice. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. She saw him walk daily, despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquitted with grief. The world hid his face from him and esteemed him not. Bitter, ever more bitter grew the white folk at his silent protest, his humble submission to wrong. They seized him and questioned him. "What do you mean by this talk about being brothers? Do you mean social equality? What do you mean by the meek shall inherit the earth? Do you mean that black people will own our cotton land? What do you mean by saying that God is you all's father? Is God a black man?" And Joshua flamed in mighty anger and answered and said, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Fill ye up then the measure of your fathers. Ye serpents, ye generations of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell?" In wild fury, the mob seized him and haled him before a judge. judge, he was from the north, was sorely puzzled. "What shall I do with him?" he asked helplessly. "Kill the black man," yelled the mob. "Why? What evil hath he done you?" But they cried out all the more, saying, "Let him be crucified." Thereupon the judge washed his hands of the whole matter, saying, "I am innocent of his blood." And so swiftly he was sentenced for treason and inciting murder and insurrection. Quickly they hurried him to the jail yard, where they stripped him and spit upon him and smote him on the head and mocked and lynched him, and sitting down they watched him die. And Joshua said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Now far down in the cabin, beyond the big road and down the lane by the creek, there where field on field of bronze stalk cotton lay bursting in white clouds awaiting the pickers, a mother strove with heaven on her knees. And she cried, "God, you ain't fair. You ain't fair, God. You didn't ought to do it. If you didn't want him black, you didn't have to make him black. If you didn't want him unhappy, why did you let him think? And then you let them mock him and hurt him and lynch him. Why? Why did you do it, God?" And then afar she heard the faint pit-a-pat of running feet. She paused on her knees. Pit-a-pat, they came across the field, down the big road, along the lane. Pit-a-pat, pit-a-pat. And then she heard the hard breathing. Ha, 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 pit-a-pat, pit-a-pat. Until suddenly a flying, sweat-swathed figure rushed on her, crying, "Mary, Mary, he is not dead. He is risen." He came in the twilight, walking slowly, with head thrust slightly forward, as was his wont, and eyes upon the ground. But the heart of Mary leapt in her, for his hair shone, the lines were gone from his face, and the sorrow slept in his eyes. His clothes were white and whole and clean, and his voice was the voice of God. And Mary said, "Where was you, son?" And he answered and said, "I was crucified, dead and buried, and descended into hell. On the third day I rose from the dead. I ascended into heaven, and sit on the right hand of my Father, from whence I shall come to judge the quick and the dead." And softly Mary laid herself down at his feet and died. All right, I want to be honest with you for a second. This episode is harder to do because I feel like people need to know how bad lynchings were for black people, so that their hearts are just broken and they can, without a doubt, realize like just how severely messed up this is. Yet at the same time, I look at some of the stories that Cohn puts in his book, and I just can't bring myself to say those words out loud. Like, Jesus was nailed to a cross, and it was horrific. There were so many other things beyond nails that were done to black bodies that were lynched on trees. Like, we're not just talking, you watch some wild Western movie and there's people hanging. There were all kinds of demeaning, horrible painful, torturous things that happened alongside of them being hung. And I like I said, I don't think I can read those stories out loud. Partially because it just feels wrong for that to be coming out of my mouth, but also like there are people that carry cultural memory with this. As a white person, I grow up, and that's not like that wasn't a fear of something that could happen to me. But for those who have grown up in areas that are still experiencing racism today, or grew up earlier in this previous generation, like they're aware. They're aware of the fear. They can feel it. As often I've talked with some of my black friends around like police, that as a white man, when I get pulled over, my experience of fear is very different from their experience of fear. Now, imagine living in a place where there is the history of lynching and what kind of fear you might have just by being out alone. Because like, I don't know if you've ever read the comics The Walking Dead or seen the TV show, but like that TV show says like, what if everything was just so bad and screwed up? And I hate to tell you this, but when you look at history and you see what happened publicly right in front of you as hundreds to thousands of people would gather together to celebrate these horrific moments and just feel nothing in them. When you look at the cross of Jesus and you're like, how could any community have ever looked at them nail a man to a piece of wood and then mock him up there? How could they not be like, this is messed up? It doesn't even matter if like an actual sinner was up there. It's still messed up. Like, how could anybody get to that point? The Walking Dead life is the life that we live in. When we are not aware of what we are doing, we will submit ourselves to the greatest horrors that you can possibly think of. And the stories in Cohn's book, like I really feel like you need to read them so that you can be aware of just how bad it was. So that you can wonder to yourself, if I had been alive during that time frame, would I have somehow been numb to this? And if I was numb to this, then what is wrong with me? How could I have missed this? I know for a lot of us, I've actually had people come up to me and be like, Jamin, if I was alive back then, I would have done something. I'm like, you cannot possibly know that. There are things right now, the horrors we're probably committing that we all feel very little to because we have not awoken to how bad they are. And one day a future generation will look back at us and judge us harshly for it, as they probably should. If it's anything like the horrors of the kinds of things that people were silent about throughout history. Other people think, well, we've kind of grown up. We're better than that now. That was a long, long time ago. And it wasn't. This was the late 1800s to early 1900s, was especially when we were seeing a lot of lynchings. That's just like 100 years ago. This isn't like some well, back in Jesus's time, they were capable of that, but we have matured. We haven't. Nazi Germany is not that far behind us. And when you look at the kinds of things that happened in Nazi Germany, you have to recognize that the church went right along with it. The people who didn't were the oddballs, people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the Confessing Church. They were the ones that stood out because they're like, this is messed up. How is everybody being swept into this movement? It's the same kind of energy that we see through all kinds of movements throughout history, including today with the MAGA movement, where religion gets mixed up with this principalities and powers movement, and then horrors come out of it, like the kinds of things that we're seeing right now. But when it's not us, we can just be so dead to it inside. We can completely miss it. Like, this is actually one of the things that I'm really happy that people are finally waking up to what is going on with immigration. But the ways in which most people have woken up recently is because ICE has killed 2 white citizens. Like, this is the same place where George Floyd was killed, and everyone was arguing, it's not what it looked like, like all kinds of things coming up. And now, because it's white citizens instead of black citizens, suddenly people are like, this is messed up. This is wrong. And I think we have to pause and be aware of ourselves in that. Because it's not until it's happening to someone who looks like me that I suddenly start saying, maybe there's something wrong here. I have to be proactively waking up to catch it before it happens to someone like me. Otherwise, the energy that takes on something like Nazi Germany, we will just fall right into that without thinking. And that is something that has happened all throughout history. It is the same movement of Rome putting Jesus on a cross. Now, you're going to see John in Revelation. He's going to take all of that and kind of picture it as empire. That when the principalities and powers kind of unify themselves with the energy of Satan, you will always find it manifest in a form of Babylon that then becomes oppressive to the weak, and suffering comes on the poor and the powerless. And this is why John in Revelation is so eager to tell the church to stay awake and stay vigilant and pay attention to the kinds of things that they are cooperating with, because Babylon is always on its way to be judged. And if we partner with Babylon, which John almost seems to give the imagery of, if we are sleeping with her, then we will be judged with her. If we are not taking up our own crosses, but we're still hanging people on them, then we are the same audience that crucified Jesus. And Cohn's book really has to wake people up to that. And often he finds himself just confused as to how we haven't. And not only that, but the church itself becomes one of the primary agents a lot of times that's growing such horrors. It's like Cohn says this. He says, the lynched black Christ was not the only Christ that artists saw. They also saw a mean white Christ symbolized in white Christian lynchers, the ones who justified slavery and segregation. To this point, James Cohn references Walter White's work, and he says that he indicted Christianity for creating the fanaticism that encouraged lynching. This is a quote from White. He says, "It is exceedingly doubtful if lynching could possibly exist under any other religion than Christianity. Not only through tacit approval and acquiescence has the Christian church indirectly given its approval to lynch law, but the evangelical Christian denominations have done much towards creation of the particular fanaticism which finds its outlet in lynching." Keep that in mind. I don't know what we do with that as a church. I mean, people are watching us. It's part of the reason so many people are deconstructing from the church. They're watching the movements that are happening around us, and they're saying to themselves, how can the same Christ that I see in the gospel have become this dusty version of the gospel that no longer has any clarity, is so caked in dust, I can't even see the original record anymore. C.S. Lewis warned us in his book, The Four Loves. He said, if ever the book which I am not going to write is written, it must be a full confession by Christendom of Christendom's specific contribution to the sum of human cruelty and treachery. Large areas of the world will not hear us till we have publicly disowned much of our past. Why should they? We have shouted the name of Christ and enacted the service of Moloch. Oh, why should they listen? Honestly, a lot of Christians were bashing deconstruction. I think people have to do it. They have to. If they're to get back to Jesus, they have to reconstruct around something that does not look like the dusty gospel that we've been preaching. And once they've done that, honestly, they come back and they start to show us the way forward, where we've begun to miss the point and miss the Christ of the Gospels. If the makers of the spirituals glorified and singing of the cross of Jesus, it was not because they were masochistic and enjoyed suffering. Rather, the enslaved Africans sang because they saw on the rugged wooden planks one who had endured what was their daily portion. The cross was treasured because it enthroned the one who went all the way with them and for them. The enslaved Africans sang because they saw the results of the cross. Triumph over the principalities and powers of death. Triumph over evil in this world. Sean Copeland, wading through many sorrows toward a theology of suffering in womanist perspective. So I'd written a post a while back in which I was looking at the song In Christ Alone, which is a popular song, a very beautiful song. But there's one line in it that bothers me. And it's not necessarily because, the authors are wrong, but the wording that they're using strikes different for someone like me. So there's a line that says, on the cross where Jesus died, the wrath of God was satisfied. Now, if you grew up with a fear of an angry God like I did, like every single thing I do is moral and I am constantly offending him and I am nothing more than a dirty worm, that kind of theology that some of us either intentionally or unintentionally inherited in some way. If you grew up with that kind of view, then the idea that God's wrath was satisfied after he killed his son, yeah, all right. Now I'm happy because I finally got to kill someone and it was the person who did nothing wrong and I loved him more than anyone and I feel so good. That kind of view of God is I don't know why that is true, but that's, I guess, the view I've been given. So those words strike terrifyingly. Whereas from what I understand, what the writers were intending was the wrath of God was satisfied. They're using the word satisfied in more of a debt kind of language. But the word sits differently for someone who has experienced theology through life differently. And that is also the case when it comes to the cross for white and black people. We experience it differently. Now, there's no one way to interpret the cross because the Bible itself is not univocal on this subject. It kind of explodes in color. What Christ did on the cross was so magnificent that it checks a lot of different boxes. Yeah, there's saving grace in it. Yeah, it's a tool toward resurrection. Yeah, Revelation is going to say that when you embrace the cross, though it looks like you're being conquered, you're actually the one doing the conquering. It's to overthrow Satan. It's to overthrow the principalities and powers. The cross explodes in color as to what it means. And if you grew up white, you're usually just used to it being a tool of saving grace and making me right with God in some way. And that's really the one thing that's been hit on over and over again. But it means so much more. And depending on your culture and the gravity with which the cross hits you, you're going to experience it different. So some of us the cross has been desensitized. It means very little to us. We wear it around our neck. It's a piece of jewelry. We would feel different if that piece of jewelry was a symbol of an electric chair. That might stick out to us a little bit more, but still, it would only stick out to us if we had experienced the fear of the electric chair. So for many black people who look at the cross and see a lynching tree, the cross strikes in a very different theological tone. So James Cone writes, the more black people struggled against white supremacy, the more they found in the cross the spiritual power to resist the violence they so often suffered. They came to know, as black historian Lerone Bennett wrote, at the deepest level what it was like to be crucified, and more, that there were some things in this world that are worth being crucified for. Just as Jesus did not deserve to suffer, they knew they did not deserve it. Yet faith was the one thing white people could not control or take away. And if the cross is for you, like you can experience like you can visualize yourself up on it because that's the trauma of your culture, well, then it carries a very different weight. And so this throws another light for us when we think of the cross. I've often, when I've thought of martyrdom, this phrase has kind of gone through my head over time. Like, the worst they can do is kill us. We'll be back. Because resurrection will bring us back. We will still experience the new creation as the world is finally put right. That's somewhat maybe the lens that those who actually have to face a cross have to come to it thinking about. Like, this tool in front of me that took Jesus' life, he was still able to take and make good, even the greatest good out of it. Now, this is not like a masochistic endorsement of suffering, because suffering for the sake of suffering, that's not always redemptive. But Jesus shows, like, even if you have to face the cross, even if you have to face the lynching tree, God is so powerful and so good that in his own mysterious way, he can take that suffering and turn it around to do some good in this world. Or again, as Revelation says, you conquer by taking up your own cross, not by shedding the blood of your enemies, but sometimes your own blood carries a redemptive flair to it. And so as we think through the cross in a different lens, we might ask ourselves, like, what other ways do people experience the cross through their own cultural lenses that would have something to say to us? Because I think Christ is speaking in so many different ways to so many different kinds of people based on how they would recontextualize what he did in their own space. If that's what's happening throughout the Bible, just think of all the different ways that it's happening throughout history. Now, one of the other things that Cone will recognize out of this that I think is something that a lot of us don't think about is that the cross is not good news to the powerful. Like those who are the perpetrators of the cross, it's very bad news. So he'll say, the cross as a locus of divine revelation is not good news for the powerful, for those who are comfortable with the way things are, or for anyone whose understanding of religion is aligned with power. I'm going to read that again because I felt like it was one of the most powerful quotes I came across in the whole book. The cross as a locus of divine revelation is not good news for the powerful, for those who are comfortable with the way things are, or for anyone whose understanding of religion is aligned with power. Cone goes on elsewhere to say the real scandal of the gospel is this: humanity's salvation is revealed in the cross of the condemned criminal Jesus, and humanity's salvation is available only through our solidarity with the crucified people in our midst. Faith that emerged out of the scandal of the cross is not a faith of intellectuals or elites of any sort. This is a faith of abused and scandalized people, the losers and the down and out. It was this faith that gave blacks the strength and courage to hope to keep on keeping on, struggling against the odds with what Paul Tillich called the courage to be. As we wrap up here, there are some lyrics I penned a while back. I'm going to read it more like it's poetry rather than a song. I just post a song in here, but unfortunately it sets off a bunch of weird copyright censors in the background, and then the podcast episode doesn't air. So I'll read these lyrics to you as we wrap up. How many times must the ground open up to drink the blood of innocent skin? How many times will Lamech get his way, claim that I embraced his sin? How many times must tongues be lifted high if the lesson learned is set aside? One God for all in every language, every tribe. The church is diversity as bride. They can't hear you calling out, I can't breathe, but Abel's blood screams out to me. They can't hear you calling out, I can't breathe, but baby, I haven't missed a thing. I knit you in the womb as an image of myself, and I see you in the tomb, and your blood cries for itself. This is one of those songs that I was putting together to kind of try to grab like what George Floyd's death might look like from God's perspective, as he looks throughout history and sees the blood of Cain and Abel and sees characters like Lamech that take God's words and then twist them to his own oppressive advantage. How the church can speak in the tongues of all kinds of languages and yet still afflict those of all kinds of tribes and languages, and completely miss the point that the church is supposed to be diverse and that we are not supposed to be trying to homogenize the church into something that's white or any one singular thing. And I think sometimes when oppression happens, and especially the white church's response is to water it down, to try to say it didn't happen, it's not what it looked like, if only they had been obedient, if only they had done this, and so on and so forth, all these different kinds of things, we end up getting into this space where we completely miss God's prophetic call to step in. We ignore the voices that are crying out, I can't breathe, while God is listening to them deeply, because where the oppressed are, there God is. As we've learned from Cone today, God is on the lynching tree, hanging in front of us. And if we cannot recognize him there, I'm not sure we can recognize him anywhere. And with that, this has been the first episode of the Dusty Needle Gospel. Remember, the gospel isn't dusty. The needle is. Let's clean it up.